The sky had been a leaden slab for days, each storm rolling in heavier than the last, saturating the earth until the ground itself seemed to heave beneath its own weight. In the quiet cul-de-sac of Maple Heights, the Smith family watched nervously as water pooled across their lawn, rising inch by inch up the driveway. Their Pitbull Scout, a broad-chested brindle with an uncanny gravity to her amber eyes, balked at the back door when they called her in for dinner. Instead of leaping into the flooded yard, she paced the fence line with a low, rolling howl that sent shivers down their spines. Mrs. Smith stepped onto the porch, umbrella dripping as she bent to coax Scout inside. The dog's muzzle lifted toward the slope behind the cul-de-sac, the same gentle hill they'd crested on evening walks, her howl shifting into a deep, insistent keening that none of them had ever heard before. Mr. Smith joined them, eyes narrowing at the hillside's line. Where a week ago wildflowers had carpeted the slope, now an ominous bulge had formed, an angry ridge in the soil that writhed in miniature. Before they could gather the children, a low roar tore through the air. Soil and roots sheared free in a thunderous rush, a 20-foot chunk of earth peeling away like brown brain matter under a surgeon's scalpel. The landslide hit the bottom of the fence line just where Scout had been standing. Mud and shattered rock slamming against the boards with splintering force. For a heartbeat, the world was pure motion, the fence flexing, the air thick with flying dirt, and then, as abruptly as it had begun, it stilled, hearts pounding. The Smiths rushed forward as Scout darted around them, tail high, barking sharp cadence barks that echoed up the hollow. The earth where they'd been moments before lay a scar, a gaping wound of churned clay and rubble. In the cage of dawn's fog, Mrs. Smith sank to her knees, pressing her palms to the sodden grass. "She saved us," she whispered, voice trembling. By mid-morning, a drone hovered above the scar, feeding live images to a group of geologists in rain slickers. They zoomed in on the newly exposed strata, layers of clay trapped beneath permeable loam, now slick with water, the telltale signs of progressive slope failure. Dr. Kimura, a landslide specialist from the state university, pointed out the tension cracks threaded across the slope's crest, barely visible beneath the dripping vines. Had earth movement continued unnoticed, she explained, tracing broken root fibers on the feed, the slide would have undermined the Smith home's foundation within hours. Below, Scout watched the drone in fascination, her broad head tilted as if studying the swirling propellers. Dr. Kimura smiled as she recognized the dog. Animals often sense ground vibrations far below human threshold, she said to the camera. Scout's refusal to enter the yard and her distinctive howl were likely triggered by micro-tremors, small slips in the subsurface clay layers that presage a landslide. She clicked a remote, overlaying seismic sensor data recorded overnight, minute pulses rising in frequency exactly where Scout had paced. Local news crews arrived, capturing the family huddled by the fence. Scout stationed at the edge of the rubble like a sentinel. The drone circled, the shot widening to show a soft balloon of displaced hillside against the backdrop of dripping evergreens. Interviewers asked the Smiths to replay Scout's barks. The dog obliged with a single, resonant howl that rippled through the morning air. By afternoon, the county's emergency management team had cordoned off a wider exclusion zone, stabilizing the slope with sand-filled barriers and plastic sheeting. Geological crews installed inclinometers and moisture probes to monitor further movement. In a makeshift command center near the Smith driveway, Dr. Kimura reviewed the sensor logs, her finger resting on the moment when the micro-tremors first spiked, 20 seconds before Scout's first warning bark. "That dog bought us critical warning time," she summarized. Had they heeded her instinct minutes later, they may not have had a safe path out. Her words reverberated through local emergency response circles, prompt enough to spark plans for integrating trained sentinel dogs into early warning networks for hillside communities statewide. As dusk fell, Scout lay by the boarded-up fence, mud-flecked and proud, tail sweeping softly in the cooling air. Neighbors paused on their porches to wave pats of gratitude, children squealing as they offered Scout bits of leftover dinner. Behind them, lights flickered on in the command trailers, the drone's last silhouettes fading into the twilight. In the days that followed, the news headlines read, "Pitbull's early howl alerts family to impending landslide," and Dog's sixth sense rescues home from destructive slope failure. Geologists and dog trainers began consulting on pilot programs. Emergency planners drafted protocols for canine alerts in seismic hazard zones. But for the Smiths, the moment remained intimate: a dog's steadfast vigil, a fence line howl, and a family spared the earth's sudden wrath by nothing more complicated than devotion made instinct. Presence before catastrophe, the rescuers would come to say, is not always measured in sensors or cameras, but in the living heartbeat of a watchful friend, four paws planted firm on trembling ground, keen eyes fixed on the horizon where danger stirs first. In the days that followed Scout's warning howl, the Smiths found themselves thrust into the center of a remarkable new awareness, one that rippled outward from their little cul-de-sac to every hill and hollow under the California sun. Geologists from the state university returned to the site day after day, documenting the telltale progression of soil creep, mapping the fracture lines that fanned like spiderwebs beneath the surface, and installing an array of ground vibration sensors calibrated to pick up the faintest shift. But it was always Scout's pacing howl, recorded and time-stamped precisely against the sensor logs, that became the headline moment in every briefing. Local fire crews invited Scout to the station, draping her in a bright new vest embroidered with the words, "Landslide Alert K9." Fire Chief Ramirez shook her paws and fitted a small body cam to her harness, wanting to capture firsthand the ground-level cues that only a dog could read. In training runs, Scout would stand at the edge of a test slope, her ears flicking as miniature vibrations were generated by hidden actuators under the soil, and then bark once, twice, to signal the precise moment the slope's angle tipped past safe thresholds. Each bark triggered an immediate radio alert to the command post, cutting response times by half. As the weeks passed, Scout's story became the kernel of a new county-wide pilot program. Emergency Management Director Lyndon Nguyen announced that any resident living on or near steep slopes would receive training in canine Landslide Sentinel methods, including how to interpret a dog's posture, pacing, and vocal patterns as potential early warning signs. Scout herself visited neighborhood preparedness fairs, trotting alongside Nguyen as she demonstrated how to read tension cracks in mud and how to maintain an emergency exit route free of debris. But perhaps the most powerful testament to Scout's impact came when the rains returned heavier than before. A second bulge began to form just uphill from the original scar. And once again Scout refused to enter the yard, this time. She barked a low-pitched alarm and ran to the fence's highest point. Her gaze locked on an innocuous grove of oak saplings. Mr. Smith, recalling the last event, dashed to his phone and called 911. By the time the command crews arrived, sliding mud was already seeping beneath the fence boards. They evacuated the home and reinforced the slope with sandbags and geotextile anchors. Days later, a minor slide collapsed the fence entirely, right where Scout had taken her stand, confirming yet again that four paws and a bark could outpace even the most sophisticated warning instruments. Through it all, Scout remained humble, her brindle coat streaked with clay, her deer eyes still as gentle as ever. Children who once shrank from storms now greeted each downpour with a sense of respect, knowing that if the rain ever reached the breaking point, Scout would know first and she would tell them what to do. For the Smith family, her presence became more than a security measure, it was a living bond. An unspoken pact that they would watch for one another in the shifting ground beneath their feet. And in every fissure that crept across those familiar slopes, Scout's steady vigil, and her fearless howl, stood as proof that sometimes the most advanced technology is nothing more than the courage of a loyal heart. As spring's thaw gave way to the summer sun, the scars on the hillside behind the Smith home stood as living reminders of forces unseen. Scout, now widely hailed as the landslide watchdog, spent her mornings patrolling the fence line with a calm confidence that belied the danger she guarded against. Each time the thunderheads gathered over the coastal range, she would lift her head and let out a single low howl, prompting the family to check the soil moisture readings on their handheld monitor and clear the emergency exit path behind the house. Geologists continued to flock to the site, taking core samples from the slide's detachment zone and examining the clay-rich layers that had betrayed their strength under relentless rainfall. Yet no matter how refined the instrumentation became, Whether inclinometers planted at key depths or ground-penetrating radar scans, researchers agreed that Scout's senses had flagged the initial slope failures long before the machines registered movement. Dr. Lopez, leading the county's Geological Hazard Assessment Unit, described the phenomenon at a regional conference. Scout's pacing howl corresponded exactly to micro-tremor peaks recorded deep within the hill. Her behavior gave us a 6-minute warning, 6 precious minutes to evacuate and secure the property before any earth gave way. Inspired by these findings, the County Office of Emergency Services, OES, contracted with a local dog training nonprofit to develop a specialized course in canine seismic sentinel work. Under the program, dog owners living in landslide-prone neighborhoods could enroll their pets for 6 weeks of targeted conditioning, learning to distinguish between normal footsteps and rumblings from subsurface shifts, to hold a steady watch on vulnerable slopes, and to alert their human partners through calibrated barks or pacing patterns. Scout herself attended the graduation ceremony, receiving a ribbon of deep blue with the county seal, and demonstrated the signature slope crack alert by standing at the fence and vocalizing the low keening that had saved her family's home. Meanwhile, local news outlets ran segments on the evolving partnership between science and canine instinct. Drone crews filmed Scout trotting along the ridge, her harness-mounted camera capturing the first crack of daylight across the fissure-laced soil. In the studio, a reporter panned between footage of sensor graphs climbing and Scout's calm gaze at the slope, explaining how humans and dogs were forming a new early warning network that blended technology with the living acuity of animal perception. On a warm June afternoon, the first neighborhood drill was held. Families gathered near the edge of the cul-de-sac as Scout, now wearing a new high-vis jacket embroidered Sentinel K9, demonstrated her alert routine. She paced the fence, halted at a subtle rise in the ground, and let out her deep, resonant howl. Parents and children sprang into action, following the rehearsed path to a pre-planned assembly point at the community center, completing the drill in under 2 minutes, well within the safe window identified by geologists. Applause rippled through the crowd as Scout received pats and treats, a proud ambassador for what would soon become the standard for hillside safety training across the region. As summer's storms moved offshore and the hillside dried, Scout's vigil remained unbroken. She took long, meditative naps in the afternoon sun, only to rouse herself at the first rumble of distant thunder. At night, she slept on her folded blanket by the bedroom door, ever ready to rise at the faintest sign of ground movement. In the Smith household, no rainstorm passed without Scout's bark prompting a quick check of the Bobby G sensors buried along the slope, ensuring that the family stayed one step ahead of the Earth's shifting secrets. And so, from a modest cul-de-sac in California to landslide corridors around the world, one dog's quiet refusal to ignore the subtle tremors beneath her paws became the cornerstone of a new era in community resilience. Where sensors beeped and screens flickered, Scout's howl spoke with a clarity born of living instinct, reminding everyone that sometimes the most advanced early warning system is not silicon and steel but 2 ears tuned to the world's faintest movements, and a heart courageous enough to sound the alarm. Presence before catastrophe lived on in Scout's every breath, every step, every unwavering gaze toward the hills she was sworn to protect. Over the months that followed, the Sentinel K9 program blossomed into a cornerstone of hillside safety across the region and beyond. Word of Scout's uncanny sensitivity and the Smith family's narrow escape reached the ears of neighboring counties, where emergency management coordinators scrambled to replicate the dogs plus sensors model. In one small mountain town, handlers outfitted every household pet with GPS tags and vibration-detecting anklets, creating a real-time network of 4-legged seismographs that fed into the town's alert system. When the ground shifted beneath a logging road one rainy evening, 4 dogs barked in rapid succession along a half-mile stretch of hillside, triggering a preemptive reverse evacuation that cleared the way for crews to stabilize the slope before a single boulder dislodged. Back at Maple Heights, the Smiths found their quiet cul-de-sac transformed into a demonstration neighborhood. Visitors, engineers, geologists, urban planners toured the retrofitted terrain, noting the reinforced French drains, the terraced berms, and most of all the low but sturdy fence where Scout had first taken her stand. Local schools brought 5th graders on field trips, teaching them to press an index finger to the ridge's tension crack markers and to listen for the exact tonal shift in Scout's howl that signaled danger. At the community center, a digital kiosk replayed the original body cam footage of Scout pacing and then howling toward the looming bulge, her silhouette cutting a striking figure against the storm-dark sky. Children and adults alike would watch her bark echo through the muddy air and marvel that a single dog, guided only by instinct, could outpace every instrument and sensor array to warn them in time. Academia, too, embraced the phenomenon. Dr. Lopez's team published a series of papers in the Journal of Earth and Animal Interface, quantifying Scout's threshold for micro-tremor detection and demonstrating how canine-confirmed alert times consistently outperformed the most sensitive ground motion seismographs in unstable clay slopes. At the State University, they established the first canine geohazard lab, where researchers experimented with combining canine behavior data, soil moisture telemetry, and high-resolution satellite imagery to predict slope failures days before they occurred. Graduate students coded machine learning algorithms that passed a Scout test, meaning that any model which didn't match or exceed Scout's early warning window was deemed insufficient. Across the western United States, municipalities began to codify Canine Sentinel protocols into building codes for firebreak and hillside protective zoning. Homeowners insurance carriers offered premium discounts to families who participated in canine training courses and outfitted their properties with canine-friendly warning systems. And in the halls of the state capitol, legislators drafted a bill recognizing canine wildlife sensors as a legitimate adjunct to official early warning networks for floods, landslides, and even wildfires, acknowledging that when technology and instinct unite, communities stand far stronger against nature's sudden fury. Scout herself grew into a local celebrity, but she never lost the quiet dignity that first drew the Smiths to her pacing vigil. She weathered winter storms curled on her fleece mat by the hearth, paws occasionally twitching as though dreaming of the hillside. In summer, she patrolled the fence at dawn, ears cocked for the faintest tremor. When she finally retired from active service, the county dedicated a small park at the foot of the slope, Scout's Watch, complete with a bronze statue of her mid-howl. Nose lifted, ears alert, families would picnic on its shaded benches, children climbing the gently sloping grassy mound where Scout once stood guard, learning the story of her bravery as they traced their fingers over the inscription, "In vigilance we find safety." Yet the true measure of Scout's legacy was not cast in bronze or written in code. It echoed every time a dog barked at a shift in the earth. Every time a family emptied a hillside home in order because a dog's howl had come first, giving them the gift of a safe tomorrow. Engineers continued to perfect their sensors. Researchers refined their models, and planners strengthened their built defenses, but always, at the heart of every landslide alert system, you'd find a dog whose unwavering presence first taught them to listen. For in that single act of instinct and devotion, Scout showed the world that sometimes our most advanced technology isn't silicon and steel but the steadfast courage of a four-legged sentinel on the watch. In the months that followed Scout's induction as the county's first landslide watchdog, an ever-growing network of Sentinel K9 teams sprang to life across California's steep coastal ranges. Handlers and their dogs formed neighborhood clusters, families on adjoining parcels of hillside, each taking turns to host slope vigil gatherings in their backyards. There, over hot tea and rain-soaked scones, they compared notes on the minute shift Scout had detected, a faint rumble beneath the garden path, a whisper of cracking roots in a nearby oak, the precise inflection of her low howl that warned them to fall back just as the ground gave way mere feet from the fence line. Engineers from the state's Department of Transportation visited these gatherings, carrying folding sensors and notepads, marveling at how canine behavior data aligned almost perfectly with high-end inclinometers and laser scan surveys. They began experimenting with hybrid alert systems, when Scout, or any trained sentinel dog, pinned her ears and barked twice. A field-deployed radio beacon would automatically energize a cascade of alarms in nearby homes, slowing oncoming commuter traffic on Ridgecrest roads and prompting automated text alerts to residents' phones. In one early test, A driver's GPS detected a landslide alert, triggered by a sentinel dog's bark nearly half a mile away, and rerouted the car down a safer valley road, avoiding a collapsing hillside that would have blocked the entire thoroughfare for days. Local universities mounted research projects exploring the neurobehavioral mechanisms behind these canine warnings. In a bright laboratory overlooking the slopes where Scout had first given warning, students recorded galvanic skin responses and heart rate changes in both dogs and handlers during controlled soil vibration simulations. They discovered that dogs like Scout exhibited a distinctive increase in beta wave activity the instant subsurface clay layers began to slip, a bioelectric signature that could, with further study, be sewn into wearable alert devices for at-risk communities. The papers they published in the Journal of Geohazard Response drew international interest from hillside towns in the Philippines and Nepal, eager to adapt the Sentinel K9 model to monsoon and quake-prone regions. Meanwhile, the Smiths, once a quiet suburban family, found themselves traveling across state lines to share Scout's story. They spoke at county fairs, emergency services conventions, and parent-teacher association meetings, always bringing Scout along. Now sporting a gleaming new vest embroidered with the Sentinel badge, children flocked to pet her powerful shoulders. Parents asked for training tips, and local media covered every appearance, grounding the high-tech talk of sensors in the simple reality of a dog's unwavering gaze. The Smiths donated a portion of the modest proceeds from their bookstore readings to fund free K9 training scholarships, ensuring that even low-income families on marginal slopes could enlist their own watchdog dogs. Legislators took notice. A bill co-sponsored by 2 assembly members from hillside districts proposed a state-funded Sentinel K9 grant program, offering matching funds for municipalities that established K9 landslide alert units. At public hearings, geologists testified alongside veteran handlers, demonstrating how Sentinel dogs had consistently outpaced man-made sensors in warning times, buying residents crucial minutes to evacuate. When the bill passed with overwhelming support, it allocated millions to equip every county with initial seed funding, kennel facilities, training courses, and sensor integration kits, effectively weaving Scout's innovation into California's official disaster preparedness framework. In the field, new Sentinel dogs proved their mettle in every conceivable scenario. In the redwood groves along the Santa Cruz Mountains, a retriever Pitbull cross named Redwood patrolled a creekside community where winter floods had undermined the adjacent hillside. Redwood's first warning bark coincided with an 0.2-inch drop in soil shear strength detected later by engineers' probes. In the foothills east of Los Angeles, a German Shepherd Pit mix called Sierra alerted trainers to a stealthy slow-moving slide that, if left unchecked, would have threatened a historic vineyard's prized terraced slopes. Each dog carried the same Sentinel badge and learned the same, low-key T-Shane barcode passed down from Scout's original howl. As the Sentinel K9 program matured, the Academy opened a new wing dedicated to canine geohazard science, complete with a mock hillside chamber where handlers and dogs trained through artificial rainfall events, simulated root fracture tremors, and even subterranean water pressure surges created by pneumatic actuators. Here, dogs learned to differentiate ordinary construction vibrations, tractor treads, earth-moving drills, from the lethal pulses of imminent slope collapse. Visitors watched through one-way glass as dogs like Scout's protégés would bark in precise bursts at the threshold of each simulated slide, then back away to designated safe zones, reinforcing handler trust in the dog's calculus of risk. When Scout eventually aged out of active service, she was honored with a community dedication, a winding concrete pathway lined with Sentinel paw impressions leading from Scout's Watch Park to the Maple Heights Community Center. A bronze plaque at the trailhead read, "In homage to Scout, whose steadfast vigilance taught us to listen to the Earth's first whisper." On opening day, hundreds of residents, including many who had never known Scout personally, walked the path barefoot, feeling the paw imprints beneath their feet as they reflected on the power of partnership between dog and human. From that point on, whenever heavy rains threatened the slopes, the carotid pulse ripples of Scout's lineage, now dozens of Sentinel dogs, could be heard in hushed barks throughout the hills above Silicon Valley. Map markers in emergency management apps lit up as volunteer handlers logged their dogs' alert runs. Creating a living map of canine confirmed hazards that kept real-time safety information in the hands of every resident. And through it all, the simple, profound truth remained. While instruments can measure moisture levels and detect ground acceleration, nothing can replace the living calibration of a dog's heart against the shifting earth. In the end, the Sentinel K9 Landslide Alert program stood as one of the most powerful examples of presence before catastrophe ever devised. Communities knew that in their darkest storms and most fragile ground, a loyal dog's quiet pacing and insistent howl would always come first, alerting them not merely with data, but with living courage born of devotion and instinct. And as long as hillsides rise and rains fall, that presence will endure, etched in pawprints across muddy slopes, echoed in every howl that heralds danger, and carried forward by every faithful dog standing guard where the ground itself whispers its secrets. As the Sentinel K9 program entered its second decade, its roots deepened into every aspect of hillside living. Along the winding country roads, guest houses and bed and breakfasts posted Sentinel dog-friendly signs, inviting travelers to learn from the on-site watchdogs trained to detect subtle ground shifts before they became disasters. Tour operators organized sunrise, slope sweep, hikes, pairing hikers with a handler and dog team so that guests could experience firsthand how a four-legged sentinel threads through the underbrush, pausing at the faintest tremor, then issuing a low-toned bark that ripples through the morning mist like a call to vigilance. In classrooms from grade schools to universities, Scout's Law became shorthand for the credo that no warning was too small to heed. Geology professors assigned students to compare seismic sensor outputs with canine alert logs, challenging them to refine algorithms until they matched the living dog's early warnings. Emergency management majors interned with K9 units, learning to integrate community-sourced dog alert networks into official evacuation protocols. And computer science teams competed to design wearable interfaces that translated a dog's micro-vibrations into haptic feedback for their handlers, ensuring that even in noisy, chaotic conditions, the first tremor Scout's descendants perceived would register as a subtle pulse on a handler's forearm. Meanwhile, policymakers celebrated the program's success by extending the Sentinel dog concept to other geohazards. In earthquake country, mixed-breed K9 teams were trained to sense the milliseconds of foreshock tremors that often precede larger quakes, allowing families to take cover seconds before the main jolt. Along the canyon rim highways, handlers and dogs conducted regular edge sweeps, patrolling cliffside road cuts for shifting rock faces, then signaling crews to install rockfall nets at precisely the right moment. Fire-prone districts adopted sentinel dogs to warn of hidden ember beds in forest undergrowth, their barks alerting crews before a single spark could flare into a blaze. Yet for all its sophistication, the heart of the program remained unchanged. At Scouts Watch Park, now a lush community preserve, neighborhood children still cluster at the bronze statue's base to press their palms against Scouts' flattened paw impression. They leave painted stones inscribed with "Thank you" messages and gather each spring for the annual Sentinel Jubilee, where dogs of every breed, pitbulls and German shepherds, collies and Labradors alike, demonstrate the timeless dance of detection, snout to the soil, ears taut, bodies poised to sound the world's first alarm. In their steady gaze and patient watch, these dogs carry forward a living promise that wherever the earth trembles, courage will rise to meet it, 4 paws at a time. Even as the hills settled into their new contours, Scout's presence continued to ripple through every community perched on a slope or lined by a creek. In Willow County, families who once regarded rainstorms with passive caution now woke at the first rumble of thunder, not in fear but with quiet confidence that their sentinel dogs would let them know if the earth beneath their feet began to stir. Long after Scout herself lay curled beneath the old oak by the cul-de-sac, puppies trained in her image took up the mantle, each one learning the slow, deliberate art of listening to the soil's softest sigh. In one quiet valley town, handlers led their dogs to the edge of an abandoned railcut, pressing paws to the clay banks and calibrating new, dog-first, early warning apps that wove canine signals into local alert networks. When a summer storm pummeled the hills there 2 years later, a young terrier cross barked at the precise moment a fissure opened beneath a leased vineyard, setting off lights in every farmhouse. Wine growers evacuated just minutes before a wall of saturated earth swept over the vines. And though they'd lost the season's crop, they credited the dog's bark with saving their livelihoods, and perhaps their lives. On the fog-draped cliffs overlooking the Pacific, lifeguards and cliff safety crews adopted Scout's protocols to guard against sudden ocean cliff landslides. Pitbull Malamute crosses paced the edge of basalt shelves, their bristles rising at the first tremor of coastal undercutting. When a chunk of sandstone sheared away near a popular lookout, the dog's urgent howls echoed across the bluff, prompting authorities to rope off the area until geologists could reinforce the cliff face. Tourists, once unaware of the danger beneath their feet, learned to respect the dog's warnings and to keep a safe distance. Even in the city, where concrete had replaced clay, sentinel dogs proved their worth. Urban planners installed soil sensing beds beneath planted terraces and park slopes, but always alongside a tether-trained companion. When a construction crew accidentally undermined a retaining wall on a steep downtown street, it was the guard dog's low pit bark that alerted a bystander, who called the collapse crews before rush hour traffic arrived. Traffic snarled for blocks, but no one was hurt. Another subtle proof that instinct still outpaces instrumentation when minutes matter most. Back at the Sentinel Canine Academy, the next generation of trainers gathered for Scout's centennial celebration. Portraits of Scout in her prime hung alongside images of Orion, Fjord, Condor, and dozens more who'd answered the call of shifting earth and swirling storms. Handlers shared stories of quiet nights awakened by a dog's pacing bark, of children cupped in arms while a sentinel stood vigil at a broken bank, and of entire neighborhoods shepherded to safety when the ground threatened to give way. As lanterns swung in the twilight and a soft chorus of bark sequences drifted across the snowy field, it became clear that Scout's legacy was more than a program or a protocol, it was a living promise, carried on every faithful heartbeat beneath a friendly muzzle. And so, from the first urgency in Scout's howling vigil to the countless sentinel dogs standing watch on every ridge and road, one truth endures. When the ground beneath us trembles and all the screens go dark, it is the bond between human and dog that will light the way. Presence before catastrophe is not written in code or cast in bronze alone, but lived in every paw print pressed into trembling earth, and in every loyal soul that hears the world's whispers and answers with a steadfast bark. As the years passed and Scout's legacy spread like ripples through the communities she had saved, the world began to recognize that the bond between dogs and humans could transcend even the most complex challenges. The K9 Sentinel program continued to evolve, expanding far beyond California, becoming a model for global cooperation between humans, animals, and technology. The program's influence reached international boundaries, with countries from all continents adopting similar systems, each incorporating canine intuition alongside state-of-the-art seismic equipment. In the Swiss Alps, mountain rescue teams integrated Pitbull Bernese mountain dog mixes into their avalanche control units, where these dogs, like Scout, could detect subtle tremors from shifting snow and warn rescue teams of impending slides. In the Andes, Peruvians trained mixed-breed dogs to patrol the floodplains after the devastating El Niño storms, their keen noses detecting shifts in water levels and soil stability long before human sensors could catch up. In Japan, sentinel dogs were deployed along the volcanic ridges of Mount Fuji, saving hundreds during an eruption by alerting local authorities to tremors hours before the full eruption began. In these places and more, the ethos of presence before catastrophe began to ripple out further. Embraced not only in the environmental sectors but in disaster management, search and rescue, and even urban planning, the technology that initially seemed indispensable, the sensors, the satellite systems, and the drones, now worked in tandem with the living, breathing intelligence of a dog. The world was waking up to the idea that a dog's sensory acuity, honed over millennia of evolution, had a place in saving lives, preventing disasters, and protecting communities. In Willow County, Scout's home, life moved on, but it was different. The Smiths, forever grateful for the dog who had saved them, became advocates for canine disaster prevention programs. They often traveled to conferences, speaking to lawmakers and emergency response teams about the power of canine involvement in disaster preparedness. They shared their story with new dog owners, urging them to recognize the untapped potential in their pets, to pay attention to their instincts, and to train them to be part of a community safety net. As part of their continued commitment to Scout's legacy, the Smith family helped establish the Scout Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at promoting canine-led early warning systems, offering scholarships to families who could not afford the training for their dogs, and funding further research into the sensory abilities of dogs in predicting natural disasters. The foundation partnered with universities, geologists, and emergency management groups to study how dogs like Scout could be integrated into broader safety nets, and how they could help predict not just landslides, but also fires, earthquakes, and floods. In the years that followed, the foundation funded research into the development of a canine disaster alert app, an innovative piece of technology that connected the behaviors of trained dogs with real-time disaster alerts for citizens. The app was synced to sensors in various neighborhoods, integrating signals from dogs who barked when sensing danger or warning humans of impending shifts in the earth, floods, or fire danger. The app would then alert users in the immediate vicinity, allowing them to evacuate or take appropriate measures before disaster struck. This breakthrough merged Scout's innate abilities with modern technology in a seamless way that ensured no community would be caught off guard. Back at the Smith home, Scout had long since earned her retirement, but she remained the heart of the family. She still had the same gentle, vigilant manner she'd shown when they'd first arrived in Maple Heights. Scout's age had crept up on her, and her steps were slower now, but she still insisted on patrolling the fence every day, walking her rounds like a true sentinel. The family would laugh and joke about how Scout, even in her old age, still felt a responsibility to be the first to sense a shift in the earth, a warning bark in her chest, just as she had years before. One quiet afternoon, as the golden sunset bathed the town in soft light, the Smiths sat together in their backyard. Scout nestled at their feet. They watched as children played in the distance, and neighbors strolled down the hillside paths, safe in the knowledge that their homes were protected not just by technology, but by the unwavering watchfulness of their canine companions. The mountains, now scarred but slowly healing, loomed in the distance, a reminder of the power of nature and the silent protectors who stood between it and the people they loved. As the years passed, more communities adopted canine-based early warning systems. What had once been a single dog's instinctive protection evolved into a worldwide network of sentinels, all guided by the same principle that Scout had taught: presence before catastrophe. The Smith family, though forever indebted to Scout, found peace in knowing that her legacy would extend far beyond their home, creating a future where no disaster, whether man-made or natural, would catch the world unprepared. Through Scout's eyes, the world had learned that sometimes the most profound systems of protection are not built with the most sophisticated technologies, but with the trust and loyalty of a dog, whose heart beats to the rhythm of the earth itself. And as long as those paws still walked the earth, there would always be a way forward, a path carved through the storm, guided by a faithful heart that had always been there to warn the world. As the years moved on, Scout's legacy continued to shape the world in ways that no one could have predicted when she first alerted the Smiths to the danger looming beneath their feet. The reach of the Sentinel K9 program expanded so far that it became an essential part of disaster preparedness globally. Canine alert teams were now stationed in every major landslide zone, earthquake fault line, and floodplain, their work deeply integrated into both urban planning and emergency response systems. The concept of presence before catastrophe was now embedded into national and international disaster frameworks, where dogs like Scout were recognized as vital first responders. As the Smith family continued to advocate for canine disaster response, they encountered a wave of supporters, both local and international. They met with city planners in Tokyo, who were keen to integrate dogs into the city's earthquake response protocols. In the Swiss Alps, mountain rescue teams had begun to use mixed-breed dogs trained in avalanche safety to assist in finding missing skiers and hikers. And they had adopted Scout's methods for preemptively detecting unstable snowpack. Researchers from New Zealand to Nepal began applying the principles of canine-sensed seismic tremors, using similar techniques to scouts and adapting them to their local landscapes, where mountain-shaped vulnerabilities presented unique risks. At home, the Scout Foundation became a catalyst for new technologies designed to harness the power of dogs' instincts in ways never before possible. With the growing popularity of canine-based early warning systems, engineers and software developers worked hand-in-hand with behavioral scientists and geologists to perfect the canine seismic sensor network. These networks used highly sophisticated algorithms that could track a dog's physical response to seismic activity, detect microtremors, and translate those behaviors into actionable data for humans. The data was then relayed to emergency teams via text or mobile alerts, warning people long before traditional systems could even register a shift. One of the first major trials for this technology occurred in California's Napa Valley. A series of minor tremors had been felt for weeks, indicating a seismic shift along the San Andreas Fault. Emergency teams prepared for a possible major earthquake. But this time, the Sentinel K9 units had a crucial role to play. Dogs equipped with the latest seismic sensors began their patrols through the region. Their behavior was monitored closely as they walked through known fault zones and areas where land movement had been previously detected. The dogs' reaction times were recorded, indicating slight changes in behavior just moments before the first seismic shockwaves hit. In fact, one Pitbull Rottweiler mix named Juno reacted to the tremors nearly 8 seconds before they were picked up by seismographs, giving the community a precious window to evacuate safely. Following Juno's early alert, local government officials used the data to optimize evacuation routes, which were cleared of traffic well in advance of the main tremor. While the damage was inevitable, it was far less catastrophic than it would have been without the early warning. Emergency crews were able to deploy rescue teams to the most affected areas immediately, and homes were secured. The trial proved to be a resounding success, and the technology soon began to make its way into other high-risk regions worldwide. The message was clear: the more instinctual and immediate the response, the more lives could be saved. As Sentinel K9 units were deployed in more regions, Scout's name became synonymous with the idea of canine-led early warning systems. The Smiths received requests to speak at conferences across the globe, educating emergency responders, urban planners, and policymakers about the invaluable contributions dogs could make in disaster response. They traveled to countries where flooding, earthquakes, and landslides had torn through communities, sharing their knowledge of how dogs could act as the first line of defense in warning people of impending danger. In Tokyo, the Smiths participated in a groundbreaking program, working with local police and fire departments to train Japanese Akita dogs to detect subtle shifts in the Earth's surface before earthquakes. In the Andes, the foundation supported efforts to train shepherd dogs to sense avalanche risks in the high mountain passes. They were heartened to see how each community made Scout's legacy its own, tailoring training and responses to local terrain and needs while still adhering to the fundamental principles of Scout's early detection and alerting methods. Back in Willow County, the Smiths found comfort in knowing that their hometown had become a model of community resilience. Thanks in large part to their beloved Pitbull, the Smith family home had become a touchstone for the foundation's success. And the community surrounding Timberline Ridge had grown stronger. More families than ever before had adopted dogs from local shelters, and local trainers offered discounted classes for those interested in learning how to train their pets to detect tremors or other signs of impending danger. More people volunteered to join the K9 rescue teams, and every person who had been saved or helped by Scout's legacy would proudly tell her story for years to come. One afternoon, as the Smiths sat in their living room, a soft breeze blowing through the open windows, they watched Scout lying peacefully in her favorite spot near the fireplace. Her coat was graying around the edges, and her movements were slower than they had been when she was younger. But her watchful eyes still sparkled with the same wisdom they had always known. The family had grown accustomed to her silent vigilance, the way she seemed to sense when a storm was coming or when the earth beneath them was shifting. They knew that Scout had not only saved their lives but had also planted a seed of change that would continue to grow long after she had passed on. And as the sun set behind the hills of Willow County, casting long shadows across the valley, The Smith family quietly acknowledged that Scout's true legacy was not only the lives she had saved or the changes she had brought to emergency response. It was the love, trust, and loyalty she had shown every single day of her life, the unwavering devotion of a dog whose instincts, once feared as mere impulse, had become the foundation of an entire movement dedicated to saving lives, protecting communities, and fostering the kind of resilience that can only come when we learn to listen to the quiet whispers of the earth beneath our feet. As the seasons turned once more and Scout's muzzle grew white with age, the Sentinel K9 program she inspired marched on with ever-growing momentum, and yet, in that very progress, her own story reached its gentle close. On a crisp autumn morning, the Smith family gathered beneath the oak where Scout had first sounded her warning howl. Leaves drifted in swirling eddies around her as she lay upon her favorite blanket. Jaws softened by time but eyes still bright with the same unerring watchfulness that had saved them all those years ago. Neighbors and friends came forward, each carrying a simple token, a pine cone carved with the word, guard. A ribbon in the shape of a paw. A small slate stone etched with Scout's silhouette. They formed a quiet circle around her, and in the hush, Sheriff Caldwell, now retired, knelt to slip a wreath of autumn flowers around her neck. "You taught us how to listen," he whispered, voice thick with gratitude. "You showed the world how to stand guard when the earth itself could not be trusted." Scout's tail thumped once, a soft echo rippling through the assembled hearts. In the days that followed, word spread that Scout had slipped peacefully into sleep, her last dream perhaps one of gazing across the hills she had protected. The community held a memorial at Scout's Watch Park, where a newly installed plaque bore her likeness and the inscription, "In vigilance we trust." There, handlers and children, researchers and residents, longtime friends and newcomers alike recited the credo she embodied, presence before catastrophe. Yet even in farewell, Scout's spirit endured. The Scout Foundation announced a scholarship in her name for aspiring canine sentinel trainers. Across California and beyond, new litters of mixed-breed sentinel pups were born under the guidance of the Sentinel K9 Academy. Each litter beginning their first lessons by listening to recordings of Scout's low keening howl. In labs and lecture halls, scientists continued to refine sensor networks against a backdrop of dog behavior data, ever striving to replicate, but never replace, the living bond between handler and hound. At the edge of a trembling slope in the Santa Lucia Mountains, a slender terrier pit cross named Echo first sounded the bark that would save a homestead from collapse. In the Sierra Nevada, a brindle shepherd named Canyon traced the footsteps of a lost hiker just moments before he slipped into a hidden crevasse. Along California's coastal bluffs, a lean foxhound pit mix called Mistral raised the alarm when a prolonged storm undercut the cliffs, prompting an evacuation before the earth gave way beneath a family's car. Each of these dogs carried a piece of Scout's legacy in their very marrow. Back in Willow County, the Smith children, grown now, children no longer, led Scout memorial runs through her old patrol routes. They guided new handlers, shared the stories of Scout's first howl, and paused at each turning point, the bulge in the hillside, the cracked fence board, the bronze statue and the oak tree. They spoke of how a single dog had reshaped their lives, their town, and through them, the world's approach to natural disasters. One indelible moment crystallized Scout's lasting impact, a high school capstone project that wove together geotechnical maps, canine behavior algorithms, and community-sourced alert networks into an open-source platform now adopted by municipalities from British Columbia to the Balkans. The project's founder, a young woman who had grown up learning Scout's story from bedtime tales, articulated it best: "We stand on Scout's shoulders." She told an auditorium packed with engineers and empathic dog lovers, "Her trust in the earth's whispers gave us the courage to listen, and to build a world where every bark, every paw print, every heartbeat can be the first line of defense against disaster." And so Scout's final chapter was not an end but a beginning, the quiet rustle of leaves around her oak, the eager puppies taking their first steps into sentinel training, the countless communities now bonded by the simple vow she taught them. Presence before catastrophe became more than a motto. It was a living promise carried forward by every watchdog perched on a fence, every handler tuned to their dog's slightest stir, Every family ready to heed that first, deep-throated warning that so often means the difference between safety and tragedy. In that promise, Scout lives on, 4 paws ever steady on trembling ground. A steadfast heart that taught the world how to listen first, move swiftly, and always trust in the faithful courage of a dog.